Hello and welcome to Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots.
My name is Erika, and I really like to watch horror movies.
My name is Katy, and I really like to overanalyze things.
Katy, what are we overanalyzing today?
We are talking about Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah,
I don't know. I was getting ASMR-y for some reason.
It's all a dream. We accidentally fit ourselves into a theme for the last few episodes. We didn't mean to. It just kind of happened. Like, last month we did Scream 2, notoriously directed by Wes Craven.
Yes.
Right? And then They Live, which is like
very 80s.
Very 80s, very like socio-political commentary.
Yes.
And so, and I feel, and we're going to talk about it, that like this movie just like so beautifully marries those two things that we've been talking about.
The slasher in the 80s.
And the 80s, yeah. And so, and here we are.
And so here we are.
So,
thanks, Wes Craven.
Thanks, Wes Craven. Yeah. So obviously this is like a classic.
Yes.
Right.
Which is what I really wanted to do. We hadn't done like a classic of the genre in a little while.
It's one that had like...
It's like genre defining in some ways.
Yeah, genre defying for sure. Defining, not defying, my bad. Genre defying for sure.
It defies in some ways.
It does, actually, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Like just a cult classic. It's a lot of people have seen it.
Huge franchise.
A whole franchise, a whole intellectual property.
Yeah.
And there has been a significant amount of like literature.
Yes.
Right? People have been analyzing and writing about A Nightmare on Elm Street for basically 40 years. So there's a lot out there.
Yeah, there's a rich history for this one.
And I think, like, again, there's some pretty good horror shit in here.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the jump scare count right now?
I do.
What was Katie's jump scare count?
In a weird reversal, I didn't jump scare once.
Not once?
I mean, I with the caveat that this was only my second, but still my second time seeing this film. Right. So I was already familiar with it. And Freddy Krueger as a character, I just find innately silly. So I'm just not in a scared, tense mode when I watch this film.
Freddy does get very silly, especially as the franchise continues.
Yeah. No, and even in this film, like one of the first things we get him do was like the weird elongating accordion arms.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
Which is kind of creepy and very dreamlike.
It is very dreamlike.
But then I think it's sort of like...
But I'm just like, this is silly, you guys.
Yeah.
He's a silly guy.
It definitely looks like it was made in the 80s, right?
I feel like even if you tried to do that today, the idea,
would still
like
just
elongating
feel silly.
arms is not like... I'm trying to imagine that with like CGI or something.
Yeah.
Does that feel creepy to you?
Yes.
Not to
Especially
me.
if I'm trapped in an alleyway.
I just think of Mr. Fantastic.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, oh, he's here to save me.
Okay.
With his genius.
Well.
And his hot wife.
No. Not Freddy.
Okay.
Yes. So I got jumped once.
Okay.
And it is.
But that's more than you normally are.
Yes. Especially for having seen this movie as many times as I have.
Yeah.
It is a Freddy jump scare, kind of towards the end when Nancy is trying to get Freddy out of the dream and into real life so she can defeat him. And she wakes up in bed after tussling with him in the dream. She sits up and she says something like, I'm crazy after all, aren't I? She's like lamenting.
Oh, yeah.
And then Freddy like jumps up from behind the bed and goes like, "Ah!" You know,
just like that. Blah, the monster.
That one, it got me. I don't know. I just wasn't ready for it.
I got to a jump scare was, even though I knew it was going to happen, for some reason, the ones that always get me the most are the ones that are like the fake out jump scares.
Oh, yeah.
So the one when, at Tina's house when they go outside, because Rod is out there.
Yeah.
And he's about to jump out of the darkness and try to pretend to scare them. I like knew it was coming, so I was kind of like tensed.
Yeah.
You know? Because I knew it was coming and kind of like winced maybe, because I knew it was, but like I knew it, so I wasn't really jumping. It was like that's like it's the closest I got. I don't know.
God bless.
Dream stuff. I don't know. I guess I'm just sort of like, okay, marshmallow stairs. I get it. It's dreams.
Yep, been there.
Freaky. So yeah, even despite his finger knives, I'm kind of like, eh.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually something that I really enjoyed is just that very opening scene where we are in a dream and we kind of see Freddy like make the glove.
Yes. That's that part. I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
And that is really cool.
And then proceeds to chase down some teenagers in their dreams. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And then I also found, I don't know if we're ready to talk about the ending scene right now.
Sure. Well, yeah.
But I find it pretty powerful and I think it holds up.
And it's one of those endings you like where the good guys lose.
Yes, and I remember the first time I saw it, I was deeply disturbed by the ending.
Yeah, no, the ending was, I was sort of like, oh, they did that.
Yeah, when I was too young to be watching this movie, I was like, oh no. But now, so because of that, childhood memory, the end scene is still very powerful to me, but like I think even somebody who doesn't have that memory, like I think the ending holds up pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's a good ending.
And I know that
we'll definitely talk about it more, but
absolutely.
I think it does what it is trying to do, which is to unnerve you.
Yep.
There were two things in this film that I was kind of left thinking about that I don't think fit anywhere else in our discussion.
Right.
That I just kind of want to touch on here on the top. And the first one's, I guess, like the ableism of this film. Like using a burn victim as a monster.
Yeah.
And just because why does he need those scars to be horrifying? Like Freddy is already a horrifying monster or something. And so why does he need those scars? I mean, I don't know. For me, that's like the one part of his story that's actually sympathetic. Because he was burned alive.
Yeah.
And that isn't justice. It's not the justice that the parents initially wanted, and it didn't do anything to save the children that were already killed. And it backfired and put more children in danger. So it's it's not justice.
Yeah.
And it's something that's I don't know, if anything makes him worth pitying or sympathizing with rather than making him monstrous. But it's used as this way as he was already a monster because of what he did.
Yes.
As much as we can call people monsters, which I feel complicated about.
Yeah.
But he didn't, I just feel like he doesn't need, the burns lead... His death leads to him becoming an actual monster.
Right.
Like this Nightmare King figure.
Yeah.
But he was a monster enough before that. And so I don't know why we need that physical stuff on the outside to show. I mean, that's such an old idea of the beautiful young whatever is good and pure. And then the person who has some sort of disfigurement or whatever is it's a sign of there being something sinister, the inner evilness. And I think, especially when you think about how he got away with murdering at least 20 kids.
I have thoughts.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But the idea of him being specifically targeting children and the ideas of the child predator, the child molester, of them being often people who can't be easily identified because they look like your teacher, your parent, your preacher.
Yep.
That maybe the movie felt like they needed something to make him easily identifiable so that his monstrosity is clear.
And the gloves with razors on them wasn't enough.
Yeah, and specifically, I think Wes Craven has talked about the look of Fred Krueger was designed after things that he had seen that had scared him, including a burn victim.
Burn victims.
I'm that's not a scary thing. I mean, it's scary that happened to that person.
Yeah.
And I just but horror in general has this really complicated relationship with ableism, especially mental illness,
especially in the slasher subgenre.
Yeah, which I just don't know if this is the film to talk about it, but I wanted to put a little thing on it.
I think that one day, eventually, we will do Friday the 13th, and I think that might be the one to really I think that conversation's totally appropriate for this episode, but I also because I'm thinking about
this is a precursor to that later conversation.
Yeah, I think about the legacy of slasher films, right?
Yeah.
And the existence of the psycho killer and how it's kind of part of it is that I mean we're using the word psycho, right? There is something inherently,
so much of it is based on the movie Psycho.
Yes, yeah, that's true. There is something inherently wrong or bad about the psycho killer, and that
it's an innate.
Yes, that inherent flawed morality has a visual component.
Yes,
right. Yeah.
So I just wanted to pinpoint that it was happening very obviously in this movie for what I think is which I just find unnecessary. I don't think he needed to be a burn victim. I mean, I guess as a good backstory for him or whatever.
Right, yeah.
And the parents getting their extra justice is cool, and I love that backstory for him. But I'm just sort of I see his burns and I'm
ow.
Yeah, kind of. I'm just sort of that sucks, dude. You're, a child murderer, so fuck you, but also, One other thing that I also want to say about Freddy Krueger at the top that's kind of related to this point is like why we call him Freddy when in this movie, at least, I was noticing that he is called Fred Krueger.
He's Fred. Yeah.
He is never, I don't think he's ever called Freddy.
Nancy calls him Freddy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Just like once?
Like once.
Yeah, because mostly she calls him Fred. I was like kind of listening to it at a certain point, but I didn't realize it until a part of the way through. And like those are just really kind of like different names to me just because Freddy is such a like diminutive sort of like child nickname, you know, that I feel like, you know, and like as the movies go on, Fred obviously becomes very much replaced with Freddy. It's like Freddy's revenge.
It is Freddy, yeah.
Freddy versus Jason. And I just feel like either it's to create this separation between Fred Krueger, who he was as a man,
the human,
and Freddy, the Nightmare King. Or there's something about like aligned with the ableism, that like infantilization of the psycho killer, which I think also is exemplified in Jason Voorhees, right? Because wasn't he like a child when he died, or like had some sort of mental retardation or something, whatever language they use?
Yeah, he had I think, I can't remember exactly what
I haven't seen it, but that's what I hear.
The idea is that Jason was a boy at Camp Crystal Lake. He was a camper and he wasn't being monitored because he had a developmental disability. He drowns in the lake because the campers weren't watching, or the counselors weren't watching them because they were having sex.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of that, and also kind of related, like we just were talking about with Psycho, where I think of Jason Voorhees and Norman Bates also being monster figures who are associated with like stronger like mother figures. You know, and so then they're being kind of like turned into children in that way. And then, but it was like kind of all over with like the Children of the Corn, and like Chucky is a serial killer stuck in like a childish doll. And like, I don't know, even Frankenstein's monster is like a child,
right?
He's like
created
out of different adults' bodies. But, so like there's this, I don't know if it's just like a juxtaposition between like the innocence of childhood and like the psycho killer that people like to play with, or if it's another one of those ableism things, or even a way to make us like pity the monsters. Because I also think about how we do that kind of with like, even with true crime, where we're always looking, like we're always digging into their past, like the past of serial killers, to be like, what in their childhood made them like this? And like, was there some sort of arrested development happening with these ones? And we even get that backstory with Freddy, I think, in the later movies.
Yes, we do get his backstory. We get some lore. And again, well then, please refer back to the Scream 2 episode where we talk about the rules of a sequel.
Yeah.
Right? Where we get more of his lore that actually ends up kind of making him a more sympathetic character.
And I just think that's an interesting thing that a lot of horror also does.
You know what the whole Fred to Freddy thing made me think of, though? Is because it's sort of like, you're like, I totally see what you're saying about like the kind of infantilization, but it also makes me think of like sort of almost like a way of disrespecting him because he's not he's Freddy, right? Like kind of that
to make him kind of,
it makes me think about in the 1980s how people who were not a fan of Ronald Reagan called him Ronnie.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, I've started calling Donald Trump Donnie.
Right, yeah.
I'm calling him Donnie. And it's like, for me, it's like a way of like, fuck you.
Yeah.
You are not.
Yeah, you're a child.
You are not as powerful as you think you are. Yeah. You're Donnie.
Yeah, you're just a child having a tantrum.
So that's what that makes me think of.
It also kind of makes me a little bit think of, just now as I'm thinking about it, because there are some things that the guy who plays Freddy Krueger is
Robert Englund.
He talked about how like part of his walk, like he got inspiration from Nosferatu, but also like this sort of like gangster swagger of like mobster, you know? And I also feel like Freddy is kind of like more of a,
right,
get him, Freddy.
Yeah,
you know,
like that would be your mob nickname.
Yeah,
like tight lip Freddy or something.
Yeah, Finger Knives Freddy.
Finger Knives Freddy. There it is. That's better. I like yours way more. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
So I don't know. Those were just like some general thoughts I had about this movie.
You know what? While we're talking about Freddy Krueger's name, I didn't actually look into it, but I meant to. Is that like Krueger is a very specific German last name, and I was just wondering if the German nationality. If like the Germanness of his last name had a significance.
Well, I know,
but I don't know.
Wes Craven has that thing about how he had a childhood bully named Fred Krueger.
Oh, okay. So
and
that's why.
That's also why in what's that other one? Last House on the Left.
Sure, that's a movie. Yeah.
That he did. I think the main villain guys in it, their names are like Fred and Krug. So, like, he just has this thing about he was bullied, and so all of his villains are named after this guy.
I mean, isn't that the way, though?
Yeah. Childhood trauma.
Yep, you're totally right. Now, Last House on the Left is one I have not seen.
Because it's a rape revenge movie.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple rape revenge films, and honestly, they can be like entertaining. But this is one that it's just not on the top of my list.
It feels like it'd be a lot.
But yes, Wes Craven did direct that one in 1972. Anyway, actually, I think now would probably be like a really good time just to have like a blanket disclaimer that like we're going to be talking about child abuse and sex abuse.
Yeah.
Like there is a lot of like rape imagery in this movie, and that's not on accident, right?
Yes.
The fact that, yes, technically in the movie, Freddy is described as a child killer.
Yeah, he's a murderer, but not a molester.
But he is, though.
In the original script, he was explicitly a child molester.
Yes.
They changed it.
Yes.
For numerous reasons, one of them being the McMartin case was in the news.
The Satanic Panic.
Yep. Which we will talk about more later.
Yep. So here's the deal, right, Katie? We've got ourselves a pretty typical slasher film.
Well, it's one of the ones that literally defined the genre.
Yes.
Right? Because it was like Halloween, and then it was this, and it was Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
And that was like, everything before that was like proto slasher.
Right.
Like Psycho and stuff, and Chainsaw Massacre.
What the professionals who study this kind of thing, yes, would define. Like, usually it's widely agreed upon that Halloween is the first slasher, right?
Yeah.
Which comes out in 78. And then, we've got Friday the 13th that I think is 81 or 82.
Yeah, and then this one's 84.
And then this one's 84. Yep. So because we have ourselves such a straightforward genre-defining slasher, we've got ourselves...
one of the three.
The first one of the three?
Of those main three that you just listed. We haven't watched any of the other two.
That's true. We have not done Halloween, and we have not done Friday the 13th. You're right. I thought you meant first chronologically. I'm like, Katie, I just explained.
No, it is last chronologically. Use your ears. Maybe we'll just have to do them in reverse order.
I love that. Okay, yeah. So again, because we have such a straightforward genre-defining slashers, we have straightforward genre-defining archetypes, don't we?
Yeah. This is like one of the clearest ones we've gotten.
Right. And so we're not going to do archetypes as our game because
it's too obvious.
It's too obvious.
It's
exactly.
just too easy.
So we're just going to talk about these characters and also go by their archetype.
Yeah,
right?
and how they kind of
fit that
help
archetype.
Start to define that archetype.
Absolutely. So should we start with Tina?
Yeah, because she's the one who dies first.
She's the whore.
That's what that means.
Yep.
And she's a very typical example of it. I do like, they kind of throw you off a little bit because she's the first person that we see.
She is, yeah.
Other than those shots of Fred Krueger, maybe. Yeah. Maybe he was still a human then. Making his finger knives. Mm-hmm. But then we see her and she's like running through the school halls in like this kind of like white, pure white, almost virginal nightgown, the young virginal maid.
Yes, that like makes her look a little bit infantilized, a little bit childlike, but also a little bit sexy.
Because it kind of clings to her sometimes, so you can see the shadows through. Yeah. But then there's also like she sees a lamb, which is another very like pure innocent symbol.
Right.
But also very like sacrificial.
You
lamb.
in danger, girl.
Yeah, like this is not, you ain't safe.
Oh my gosh, thank you for using the word sacrificial.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But then that's in such sharp contrast to her, the other nightmare that we have of hers, where she actually, like, I think it's not a mistake that she survives that first one where she looks very young and cutesy.
Yeah.
And then her next dream, which is right after she has sex with her boyfriend.
Yeah.
And she is dressed in, I think, is that her boyfriend's shirt? It's like a button up that's too big for her. Yeah. She doesn't seem to be wearing anything else.
Yeah.
And I just feel like based on that imagery, of course she's going to die in that second dream.
Yeah.
She just had sex.
Yeah.
And she's like flaunting it practically.
She just had premarital sex. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so what's interesting though is, they kind of set up Tina like she's gonna be our final girl.
Yeah.
Like she survives the first dream and then
she's the one who we kind of follow who's like, I had this dream.
And then she's like trying to get everybody to realize that they had the same dream.
Yeah.
Because like Nancy and Glenn and Rod, they're all like, oh yeah, my dream last night, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and like we all had the same dream. You guys, we should be taking this seriously.
Finger knives.
Yeah, right. But Tina does not really make it very far.
No,
right?
She has to die first.
So she falls asleep in what I think is her mother's bed.
It is her mother's bed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to back up just a hot second. again, in that first opening scene, the first scene, she wakes up and she's got the
slashes across her abdomen, her womb, if you will.
Yeah, very close to the womb, and then of course her useless mother.
Yes, I mean, I appreciate that her mother heard her scream and came in to check on her, and then her daughter was like, "Yeah, I had a nightmare," and so she's like, "Oh,"
and then she's like, "Okay, well then you either need to clip your nails," thinking that she did that.
Because what else would you think?
I don't know.
That's probably what I think too. Yeah. I'm not going to think Nightmare King.
I'm not going to think finger knives, right?
Yeah.
And then she's like, "You either need to clip your nails or stop dreaming like that." I'm like, great advice, Mom. Thanks, love you too.
Go back to your nameless lover.
Yes, who is not Tina's dad. Yes.
Yes.
And it's also, I found it very interesting, and of course, I think this kind of, like we were talking before we recorded, and you were like, does this movie give you Satanic Panic vibes? I was like, absolutely, right? And so one of the things that I think really brings up the Satanic Panic of it all is that in Tina's room, she has that crucifix.
I had so many questions about religion in this movie.
Yes, and the crucifix actually, or the image of the crucifix kind of follows us along the entire film.
In an interesting way where it doesn't seem to actually do anything.
No, it doesn't. It does not protect them. Like, I think Tina tries to sleep with it, right? When she goes back to sleep after that nightmare.
Well, it's on her wall.
And she takes it off.
It's Nancy. It's when Nancy's sleeping in her bed because Tina and Rod are in her mom's bed.
Yeah.
So Nancy's sleeping in the bed while Glenn's relegated to the couch.
Yeah.
And the cross just happens to fall off.
Oh, into the bed.
And at first, Nancy kind of ignores it.
Yeah.
But then we have that creepy part where Freddy goes sort of halfway through the wall. It's all the vinyl or whatever they used. That's creepy.
That was good.
I do really like that part. Yeah. And then after that, she clearly gets like a bad vibe. She didn't see it, but she's like, I feel unnerved. Yeah. And then she hangs it back up.
Oh, okay.
But then, we see it again.
And we see it again.
In I forget whose dream.
Is
it when
it's
Nancy's
dream?
Yeah, Nancy's one of her last dreams where she's trying to catch him. Where for some reason it's in Freddy's boiler room.
She basically finds like trophies.
Yeah.
Right? Like she finds Tina's crucifix.
Yeah.
And then she also finds something of Glenn's, his headphones.
Yes.
Right? And it's interesting. So there's like almost sort of this like...
I didn't think of them as trophies, but obviously they are.
I thought of them as trophies
immediately.
Obviously. Yeah. But there's no trophy for Rod.
Huh. I wonder if there is.
Maybe it's because Rod is dumb and useless, and I'm happy he dies.
I'm trying to think of any like defining object that
for
would
Rod.
work
Exactly. I don't know that there really is one.
But I also do think it's interesting that like, I don't know, just the idea that the cross isn't something, because I don't know, the religion thing of like 5, 6, get your crucifix, but it obviously doesn't do anything. I mean, I guess maybe it does because Nancy puts it up and Freddy doesn't come through the wall again and instead goes and kills Tina. But I don't really think that was because of the crucifix.
Yeah, I think Freddy had his eyes on Tina for quite a while.
Had sex.
It's also worth noting that Tina is short for Christina.
Oh.
I just think of Christina.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but
so it's those trappings of Catholicism.
Yeah, and
are really not doing anything anymore.
No, but again, like I still feel like it has like a really strong connection to the Satanic Panic, right? And like God will protect you, even though nobody's protected in this film. I
did think this one article that I read by Sarah A. Hughes, American Monsters, Tabloid Media, and Satanic Panic from 1970 to 2000. Well, I read the chapter that talks about Nightmare on Elm Street and the Satanic Panic, which we will talk about more. But the thing that it said about religion that I found really interesting is Hughes kind of argues that while Catholicism, like specifically Catholicism, was the root of like that exorcism and Satan worshiping kind of stories, like all of that was coming out of Catholic imagery.
Right.
Once televangelists like started really popping up, 60s, 70s, 80s, were definitely in their heyday in the 80s.
Once the evangelicals become politically motivated and align themselves with Republicans, which before that, even the evangelical voting bloc was not a voting bloc.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
They actually weren't even necessarily that involved in politics.
Right.
Anyway, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so in the 80s when that's really a thing, that and horror movies of the 80s sort of effectively separated the Catholic Church from the Satanic Panic so that instead it could be rooted in white suburbia.
It could just be in American culture, just point blank.
Which is like good for evangelists because it was useful for them to have Satanism standing in direct contrast to what they saw as like the ideal nuclear family. I think Sarah Hughes specifically says the nuclear family in suburbia, where traditional gender roles were more firmly entrenched, whiteness was visibly stripped of any lingering ethnic identity, and innocent children and virginal adolescents had the strongest chance of survival. And yeah, she just goes on more to talk about how like in the 1970s it was more sort of like Charles Manson types and like Amityville horror and like The Shinings were all these things that were happening kind of like in remote regions of the country, but still had a bunch of like Catholic imagery, and Satanic Panic was still kind of Catholic-y. Yeah. But then once we get into Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and Fred Krueger, like all those popular commercial anti-heroes of the 1980s, she calls them, that's when it becomes evangelical conceptions of the suburbs. That where it's like everyone's white, everyone's financially comfortable. You know, people are dying because they don't adhere to the like pro-family standards.
Right. Yeah. So they're we kind of get like a super swing towards the right. Yeah. Politically and socially in the 1980s. And so we start really reinforcing those quote unquote traditional family roles. Yeah. Yeah.
I know, but I just found that article interesting, that specific part. I guess it was technically a dissertation that later was published. But specifically a part about like the move away from that Catholicism into the suburbs specifically. Move away from that kind of more Catholic, like the crosses being able to protect you and stuff. Like priests become less effective against the demons. And demons become less associated with hell and become more just sort of like interplanar beings that we need to fight against. And like, and I just saw it here in this one where it's like, we still have that kind of religious imagery, but it isn't really like tied in the same way. Yeah. What's more tied is the like family ideal that exists in evangelicalism, but isn't like explicitly like, so come worship our God. Yeah, you know, it's like it's a little more insidious, if you will.
One other thing I wanted to mention about Tina is that she also like we talked about how there's like a theory that this entire movie is a dream, right? And then there's a very interesting part right after the nightmare. They wake up, it's time for school, and they're all meeting up before school.
Oh yeah, when they're walking,
and they're walking, and we see the creepy girls jump roping. It's kind of foggy, and then we just kind of pan over. Yeah. And it's Tina and Nancy talking, right? And Nancy makes a mention of the jump rope song. Yeah. So, like, it's interesting that, like, they have a cultural knowledge of Freddy, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, no, and speaking of the is it all a dream thing, there's a way that those little girls could be the bookends of it because they also show up as, like,
at the very
last,
end.
They're, like, the last shot. Yep. Is them. And so it's like, oh, obviously this is all a dream because these girls aren't.
They're not
real, or the representations of the girls who were killed by Freddy Krueger or whatever they are, you know. Yeah. It's, but just the idea that it is something that they all have in their mind. Well, that's when you come to the other theory about it, which is that if Fred Krueger was a child molester instead of a murderer, that these 4 kids and probably other teenagers are sort of reawakening their repressed memories of having been molested. Yep. Which could also explain a lot and also take away that supernatural element where it's just like, of course you're having those dreams. Something traumatic happened to you when you were a kid and you're just starting to remember it.
How that works sometimes.
Yeah, and it kind of, it would make the parents almost more sympathetic because of course they wouldn't believe Nancy about it being some sort of supernatural entity. It would be like, oh, she is dealing with this trauma is resurfacing in her memory.
Yeah, but I would say that the layman's understanding of trauma in 1984.
But the idea of repressed memories was real popular.
It was, yeah.
That was another element of the Satanic Panic.
So obviously Tina has to die first, right? Yeah, it's like not even...
It's another one of those examples, though, of like the quote-unquote horror character who is just like a really nice girl.
She's just a high school student, you know?
And she's having sex, and that's like enough to condemn her. But of course, that's what the archetype is. But like, she's done nothing wrong. Her worst crime, I think, is that she's a child of divorce and has a mother.
Her dad abandoned her.
Yeah. And her mom's off in Vegas with a boyfriend.
None of those things are her fault.
Yeah, so she's not adhering to the social norm idea of what family is.
Right. It's also kind of worth noting that, at least to me, like, yes, of course, Tina and Rod are having sex, but Tina doesn't appear to be particularly enthusiastic. Like when they go to have sex, like it's kind of Rod being like, come on, come with me. We're going, we're doing this.
I got the vibe that was their kind of their dynamic, their thing, because they're always getting in arguments and breaking up and getting back together is what it sounds like. When Nancy talks about like, well, yeah, sure, of course her and Rod were just fighting before she died, but he wouldn't kill her because they were always just
they
fighting.
Always do that, yeah.
Like when weren't they just fighting? But then after
and he's never killed her before.
Yeah, and then after they have sex, Nancy's first little line, her little quip or whatever, is like, I knew there was a reason why I kept you around or whatever. So she seems to be enjoying the sex.
Yeah.
She explicitly is enjoying the sex in a way that is like very contrasted to like the final girl archetype of Nancy.
Yep.
Who like could not be bothered.
Nope.
Every time Glenn even gets close to suggesting, she's like, Glenn, be real.
Be real. Yeah. So then Rod dies next.
Yes.
Right. And to me, it's pretty straightforward that he's the fool.
The thing that really solidifies him as the fool to me,
What's
it's
that?
not even what he does, it's what the cops say about him, which is that he is a, quote, musician type who has been arrested for drugs and brawling.
Brawling, okay.
And I'm like, well, okay, drugs, there we have the illicit substances.
Yeah, that's foolish. Yeah.
We have him being kind of like the one who's a bit of an outcast, which is very much the fool archetype, is the one who's a little bit outside in some way.
He is
not part of the like, you have kind of the core four,
yeah,
and then the fool who's different in some way.
Yeah.
And I don't know, even just the musician vibes feel kind of full.
Yeah. Well,
because he's an artiste.
I mean, he's just an asshole.
He is kind of a jerk.
And like him, he tries to like initiate a fight with Glenn, like in the backyard of Tina's house. I'm like, all right, gentlemen, like put your dicks back in your pants, like knock it off, Well,
and he seems to really delight in a way that is not dissimilar from Freddy Krueger. He really delights in like scaring people.
Sure does, yeah, including his girlfriend.
That's like his normal way of initiating conversation with people seems to be just grabbing them from behind.
Yeah, to jump up and go, bah! Yeah.
Like that's how he gets Nancy when he wants Nancy's help and wants to be like, I didn't kill Tina,
Yeah.
He like just pops out of the bushes and grabs her.
Yeah.
Like, Rod, why is this your go-to?
Why is this how you deal with things, right?
Yeah. But I end up feeling very sympathetic towards him.
Because he dies in jail?
I don't know. There's just like little things. I mean, I think it's interesting that of the 4 teens that are our main characters,
right?
We don't really meet any other teens.
Not really.
He's the only one where we know nothing about his parents.
Yeah, like they're non-existent.
They don't get mentioned. He doesn't get bailed out of jail.
Yeah, right?
Are they at his funeral? We don't know.
Yeah, Rod gets a funeral.
I do find it interesting that Rod gets a funeral, but Tina
doesn't.
But I also wonder if it's because Rod doesn't have like family in the same way. So they're like, we're just going to give him kind of like, whatever the equivalent of a pauper's funeral is.
Yeah.
We're just going to put him in the ground and move on. Whereas Tina's family is maybe taking time to do funeral arrangements.
To do a thing. Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of what I thought. But it also made me think of, I couldn't, because I know there are Hamlet references in this movie.
Yes.
I also had to think of Ophelia and her funeral that she gets where it's like a suicide who is getting burial rights anyway. Oh. And just the way of like having people sort of talking about like, was it a suicide? Wasn't a suicide? Are they deserving of the death that they got? Are they deserving of having burial rights? Should we honor them? Did they get what they, it was very like Ophelia to me.
Oh, interesting. What else?
But also just, the way the cops treat him, of course, got to me. And they didn't even let him clean his girlfriend's blood off of his hands. Like, he's in that jail cell with blood on him.
Yeah, right?
Let the man wash.
Yeah. And it's interesting because he is an idiot and an annoying teenage boy. But it's, like, pretty obvious that he did not kill Tina.
Yeah.
And it's also very obvious that he probably did not kill himself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it does, like, Freddy kind of recreates a kind of classic jailhouse suicide with
his blanket.
The blankets tied up into a rope, that kind of thing. But it just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. There's like so many things about this movie that don't make any sense that like all of the adults especially are like, yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah, he totally killed his girlfriend Tina, even though her blood is all over the walls and he's only just got a little bit of blood on.
Yeah, like he should be drenched. Yeah. And like, what weapon did he use? Like,
exactly. A weapon nobody can find.
Yeah, because I think he has a knife on him or something.
Probably.
They find him with a knife, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But it's like, not the knife.
No.
No.
Any level of forensic investigation would probably find that pretty quickly.
And also, you would think as Nancy's dad, the sheriff, you would have to have a moment of wondering, like, weird, how did my daughter somehow know that Rod was in trouble right before he killed himself?
He actually died, yeah.
Like, is my daughter a prophet? What is this, you know? Like, one has to wonder.
Is she a seer?
But I also think Rod is just kind of generally a good example of, like, masculinity in this movie.
Absolutely. He's really not... He's not a lot, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know anything about his interests.
Well, apparently he's a musician type.
Is
he a musician type or is he a musician?
Yeah, and he's been arrested for brawling.
And
right?
drug use.
And drug use. But, like, we don't know... Yeah, again, we don't know anything about his family.
That I found most, like, telling in his character was, like, I think it's really obvious that the two boys, Rod and Glenn, have a harder time admitting to the nightmares that they're having.
Yes.
Like, once Nancy puts together the finger knives, she's like, oh my God, Tina.
Shit, yeah.
We had the same dream.
Yeah.
You know?
And
But, like, the guy's kind of like, I mean, Glenn continues to not really ever quite admits it, but not really.
And then Rod does. And
he has a line that's like, guys can have nightmares too, you know.
Or like, yeah, everybody has nightmares.
Yeah.
Like, we're not.
But he's like being so defensive about it.
It's the strict enforcement of gender gender roles.
Where he has to be the tough guy.
That, men are not allowed to express any emotion except anger.
Yeah.
Even if it's something that happens to them in like a dream. Right.
Right, yeah. No, and I also think it's significant that the reason why he doesn't like move towards Tina at first and try to help her is because he thinks it's a nightmare. He makes that line too, which I think is interesting.
Thought she was having a nightmare.
That like he's lost his sort of grasp on reality.
Yeah.
Which no wonder with what Freddy Krueger's doing. But like, I don't know. I just think there are little moments that if they were fleshed out more would make him a very interesting character.
Make it an hour 40.
You know?
Hour 40 is
Rod and Glenn, because they're not really fleshed out.
Yeah.
And Tina, honestly.
I'd like to see them interact with each other a little bit more in
are
a
they
way where they're
friends, or
not
they hate each other?
posturing and trying to fight or whatever it is they do. Yeah. I think it's very much like it's Tina and Nancy that are friends.
Yeah.
And then like the boyfriends are hangers on. Very similar to Scream.
Yeah.
Although Stu and they were friends. Yeah. But anyway, Glenn and Rod are just kind of the satellite boys sort of around the core relationship, which is Tina and Nancy.
Think Glenn is maybe a little bit closer to Tina just because he does, for some reason, it's the trio, right? It's Tina, Nancy, and Glenn who are having a sleepover all together. Like, Glenn doesn't need to be a part of that, but he is. And so obviously,
there too.
Well, yeah, but he wasn't invited.
Oh, but he shows up anyway.
Yeah.
And
like
then
Glenn was invited, so obviously Tina has some sort of like comfort or feeling of safety with him, which is nice. But we don't really know what their relationship is.
Yeah, or maybe him and Tina have been together for quite a while, and she's like, Nancy. "Oh yeah, Glenn, I know Glenn." Yeah.
I mean, also, if Nancy and Glenn live across the street from each other,
right?
Like these girl kids who like grew up together. Tina probably grew up with them too.
Yeah. Should we talk about Glenn?
Yeah. Moving on to Glenn.
Right. So, I mean, he's pretty obviously the athlete.
It's explicitly stated.
He literally has a Letterman jacket.
There's the thing where Nancy is like, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to pull Freddy out of my dreams, and then you're going to cold clock him. And when he's like, wait, what am I going to do? She literally says, you're the jock. You have a baseball bat or something. So, he's the athlete.
He's the athlete. And when we actually see Nancy wearing his Letterman jacket in the earlier scenes of this film.
Yes, right? Which I feel like normally, in the most patriarchal sense, can be a sign of like possession.
Right.
Of like claiming, protecting perhaps.
Maybe.
But possession. But I do kind of feel like in her case, it's almost more of a case of like usurping his athlete powers.
Nice. Yeah, she really does. Like, Nancy does not fuck around.
Like, she goes after the killer in the way that her jock boyfriend never even thinks to do.
Yeah, right. What else is interesting to me is that, again, we've been talking about archetypes. We've talked about them many, many times, right? And then especially when we look at a slasher, remembering that the deaths of the women tend to be a little bit more drawn out, a little bit more violent. But it's worth noting that Glenn gets...
pulverized?
I mean,
atomized?
liquefied, right? So it's interesting the way Glenn's like he's just hanging out in bed, right, with his headphones on, and he's wearing a very skimpy crop top.
Yeah,
which is funny because that might be an article of clothing we might be more likely to see a woman wearing.
At least today, I feel like
in a movie, made
crop top,
in a movie made in 1984. But, I mean, do you remember Sleepaway Camp?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. An 80s dude in a crop top.
Yeah.
Not the rarest thing.
Not the rarest thing.
And
but
the short shorts, yeah.
It is kind of, there is something.
But the scene of him, I mean, it's the classic shot of him sort of like leaning against his desk on the phone, talking to his girlfriend, where he kind of has his hip jutted out in his little cute crop top.
It gives femininity.
Yeah. It's feminizing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, Tina's death is pretty...
I mean, Tina's death is drawn out.
It's
people have compared it to a rape scene.
It's very. And then Rod's, like, we just kind of see
that he's getting strangled.
And then we just kind of go away from it. So we don't really get to, like, see his death as much.
Glenn's death is interesting because it's not really drawn out, but it does seem to be the most bloody.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's, like, that's more blood than any human body has.
Yeah, it's a geyser.
Yeah, right?
It makes literally no sense.
And then not only that, but then, like, after Glenn dies, there continues to be blood soaking that room.
Yeah.
Dripping through the floor into the first floor below. Mm-hmm. And, like, obviously his parents are incredibly upset, but, like, how are they not just, so confused as to how there is that much blood?
Yeah, I would just be in a state of shock.
How could Glenn, who his mom checked on just a few moments before, was laying peacefully on his bed listening to music.
To KRGR.
Okay.
Because it's Kruger.
Oh, shit.
Did you not get that?
No, I didn't.
KRGR! It's Kruger! All right. That's how you knew that he was falling asleep.
Yes, and that he was going to enter a dream. Yeah. Yep. And then him slipping into his bed and liquefying into
like you have to
gallons of blood.
How does a man, and she sees it, his mom sees the geyser.
Yes.
And it's just like, I mean, obviously she's horrified by it.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But yeah, there's an extent to where you're like, that defies what the mental capabilities of a human is like able to comprehend.
And also, like, again, thinking about like the dream-like themes in this movie, it's like shit happens in dreams that you're like, that's crazy.
But you don't really question it.
You're not really questioning it because it's...
Yeah.
You're in a different reality.
Yeah, where it's like, if I'm not supposed to wonder about it, then I'm not. There's a suspension of disbelief.
There it is. That's the one. There's the one.
That also exists in movies.
So it's... Yeah, Glenn and Nancy's relationship is interesting to me because it is sexless. Yes. Which is fine. But like
But that seems to be on Nancy's orders.
Which is fine.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Draw your boundary, girl. If Glenn doesn't like it, you guys are in high school, you can break up.
Yeah, not a big deal.
Well, now he's dead, but anyway.
But we know he wants to be having sex because he has that whole thing about morality sucks when he hears Rod and Tina having sex because he seems to think that if it wasn't for his morals, he would be having sex with Nancy, which isn't true.
No.
Nancy's the one who rejected him.
Yeah, but they have an interesting relationship. So, like, we know they're not having sex. And then, like, after Tina and Rod die, their relationship does kind of devolve into, like, business transactions. Like, I'm going to fall asleep, you wake me up, right? And then, like, there's the scene where they're walking along
the
bridge, and Glenn's eating, and Nancy's got like some book.
Her booby traps.
Her booby traps book. So crazy.
God, I love her.
And she's like trying to talk to Glenn, and Glenn's like, I don't know.
But also, he's like clearly been concerned about it because he's been reading up on Balinese dream techniques.
That's true. Yes,
he's the one who first is like, when you meet a monster in your dreams, you turn your back on it. You take away its power. Yeah. So, like, he's doing more than he wants to admit. Yeah. In the same way Rod doesn't really want to admit to his dream, but eventually it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know what? That's a really good point. Glenn does do a little bit of heavy lifting, but I feel like Nancy's really doing the most of it.
Twice this woman asks you, just stay awake so that you can wake me up when I start having a nightmare. Twice. And twice. Nope. He just fucking falls asleep.
Can't do it. Nope.
That chick's been awake for like a week. Come on.
Yeah.
But yes, I think one of the things I was wondering about when I was watching this movie, because obviously a component of the slasher is that people are punished. And I was sort of like, punished for societal ills, right? I mean, there's in the movie, it's that Freddy is killing them because of what their parents did.
Yes.
Easy. But in the like meta sense, Tina is being killed because she's the whore.
Yes.
Rod is being killed because he's a druggy rebel guy,
yeah.
you know, who doesn't care about authority or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And like, why Nancy and Glenn? Because they seem like such wholesome all-American kids. And I really think it's because they don't do gender right.
No, they do not. Nancy especially is not.
No, but I also think him, because there's this thing that
Because the crop top.
Well, no, because it actually was also, I was already thinking about it, but then I read that article that you sent me by Brittany Caroline Speller.
Good stuff.
That I think you'll talk about also, which is the cultural human sacrifice in Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Baby. Yep.
Where she also specifically talks about like Glenn as damsel in distress. Which, you know, the final girl must try and, in this case, fail to save. And Nancy also does that with Rod when Rod's in the police cell, you know.
Yeah, she tries.
But there is this thing about these men being sort of like the princess locked in the tower. Glenn's stuck in his house.
Yeah.
His parents won't, you know, take the phone off the hook.
They took the phone off the hook, yeah.
So, like, she is technically locked away from him. He has been locked in this tower in the same way that Rod is locked in this jail cell. Like, so they are the princesses that are, like, trapped.
Meanwhile, Nancy literally has bars on her windows.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But yeah, there's just also like, yeah, her athleticism and her like going after it and at least trying to get out.
Yeah.
Glenn doesn't even realize he's in the castle, you know, trapped in the tower or whatever.
Yeah.
He's not even trying to fight against Freddy Krueger. Really? He's just sort of going along with what she says. Like, he's such a passive character in contrast to Nancy's.
Very, yeah.
Like, active character, which, you know, yeah, it's that like masculinity that the final girl has that we'll talk more about with Nancy. But it just, yeah. It's just Glenn and Nancy have this gender inversion in their relationship, which is what makes them the targets.
Yep, and especially in 1980s America with the rise of the religious right and the moral majority, like gender roles are like
the thing,
right?
Yeah.
Family structure, and then like obviously in family structure we get
the patriarch.
Yep.
The women who are obedient.
Yes.
Following their roles, the active men and the passive woman.
And neither of them do that. So
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because talking about Nancy.
Let's.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, she has that thing that Carol Clover sort of defined as a part of the final girl, which is like a certain masculine aspect.
I just want to note, speak of like, I guess we could, obviously Nancy is the final girl, right? But if we wanted to have some fun, we could call her the athlete, right? Because she is wearing the Letterman jacket for a second, right? And then here's the thing. This is what I wrote down. Is that Nancy literally does not sleep for a week.
Yeah.
Right? Is what
it's like 6
we're
days.
told. 6 days. And yet she goes to the library to conduct research without the use of the internet.
Yeah.
To conduct research on improvised explosives.
Yeah.
And then come up with and execute a plan to defeat Freddy Krueger.
I know.
That's a lot.
I love, at one point, when she's like reading the book or something, I think she's talking to Glenn and she just says, I'm into survival.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's the final girl energy we need. That is a girl who knows she is a final girl.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she's, I mean, I think that's another aspect of the final girl, that she can be kind of an amalgamation of the other archetypes in some ways.
Right.
That we haven't really talked about before, but I think that's true, that she has like, she is smart, like a scholar, and going to do the research.
Yep.
She is active in going after the bad guy, like a jock, an athlete, you know? She has these moments of like prescience that the fool can often have, you know? And then she has that weird like dichotomy with the whore. Like there's such a connection there between them, the virgin whore thing. And like, and of course in Nancy's final dream, she's also in a virginal white sleeping outfit, not a gown like Tina was.
Yeah.
It's like a 2-piece little button up with pants, but still it's like that virginal white thing where like Tina and Nancy are very much set as like mirrors of each other, not opposites, mirrors.
Yep.
Another aspect of Nancy's like final girlness, I think, is also just how like isolated she gets, and I think part of that is actually like Freddy Krueger intentionally doing that, but also it's just sort of like the people around her not being there for her. Like I was saying with Glenn twice has the opportunity to step up and he doesn't, and then she asks her dad to do the same thing, come get me in 20,
a law enforcement officer
12:30, and like eventually he comes, but at that point she's already basically saved herself. Like dude. Like, she doesn't have anyone else she can rely on, not her parents, not her boyfriend. It's really just herself. Yeah. And that is something that, like, Nancy's mom even says about her, that, like, you face things. That's your nature. That's your gift. That Nancy is clearly this, like, go get 'em, like, take things on kind of, like, independent person. Nancy's mom is also brings up the idea of turning away, too. Like, sometimes you have to turn away, though, which is the same thing Glenn talks about. But, like, that's just, like, I don't know. The independence of the final girl, which is something we talked about with Sydney Prescott, too, in our last one, where it's like she needs to be isolated in those final moments because it needs to come down to just her and the psycho killer.
Right, because it's always...
But also because other people...
About that.
But also just because other people just aren't fucking there for her.
They're not there, yeah. Yeah, that's what... that also gets mentioned in the cultural human sacrifices.
Yeah.
In Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street. But yeah, how, like, basically it is the fate of the final girl to either enlist help...
Yeah.
Or just...
Fucking figure it out
Fucking do it themselves, which is basically what Nancy does.
Because Nancy tries to enlist help.
Yeah.
Like, again and again, she is telling everybody she can tell.
Yep. Including adults.
Which is what you're told to do as a child. Like, tell a trusted adult. She tells several.
Yeah.
None of them fucking do anything for her other than send her to a sleep therapist person.
A sleep clinic.
Scientist, whatever.
Which she has a nightmare during. And then, like with Tina's precariously placed slashes on her nightgown, Nancy brings back his hat. And everybody, all the adults, the doctors, the parents are like, fucking crazy, right?
Well, I think the reasoning is that she got it from somewhere. Like, in the real world, and she brought it with her to the sleep. But, like, how did they not... What, she was hiding it under her dress? Like, what?
It's like a pretty big hat.
Yeah. I mean, I could see her mother thinking, like, when I grabbed those finger knives that night that we all murdered Fred Krueger, did I also grab his hat? I can't recall.
Who got his hat?
Did somebody do that? No, my daughter has it, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nancy's mom makes a lot of...
So, Nancy's mom, she has a name. It's Marge.
It is Marge.
What about Marge?
The Ides of Marge.
I wrote down that Marge is a special mess.
It's interesting because I feel like when we first see her...
Yes.
She seems fine.
Fine.
Maybe a little cold, maybe, for a mother, but I feel like the first time we see her is it in the police station?
Yes, because...
And she's, like, dealing with her ex-husband.
Her ex-husband, yeah. I think so. Like, that is... You can accept that, right?
Yeah,
that
but then, like,
there.
we see scenes of her being like, oh, Nancy, can I get you some warm milk? What can I do to help you sleep? When Nancy freaks out in the bathtub, her mom is, like, there.
Yes.
Like, she doesn't seem at first like she's a bad mom.
Yeah.
And then... I mean, it's just sort of like the creeping alcoholism that comes in.
The one specific, it looks like vodka to me.
Yeah.
The
same bottle over and over again.
Yeah, the same bottle of vodka that exists in the kitchen, hidden in the linen closet.
Gets smashed on the ground at one point. But yes. Back again.
And then as we
talk about a dream imagery, it's like literally the same bottle.
Yeah. And we see it. We don't see it at first, but then as we continue to see Marge and scenes with Marge, it is just like right behind her.
It's
or
like
right next to her.
Or it's in her fucking hand.
In her hand, yep.
Yeah. No, and there's this like reversal that happens where, like I said, at first she's like taking care of Nancy and making sure she's okay. And then like one of the last scenes we get before Marge dies is Nancy tucking her own mother into bed and telling her it'll be fine.
Yep.
It's like Nancy's stuck again.
Because she got super drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, it's a complete role reversal.
And obviously something that is just super common for a lot of children of alcoholics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Having to be the parent in the relationship.
Yep.
Which, Nancy has enough going on. She should not have to be dealing with that too.
And it's also super interesting that, and many people have made this point before, that in one scene, she tells Nancy that Freddie cannot hurt her, right? And then in the very next scene, we're with Nancy when she realizes that mom has put bars on all the windows.
Yes.
And it's like, so if Freddie cannot hurt her, what's up with the bars, Marge?
What's that about, Marge?
Yeah. But I kind of felt like because Marge is the one adult in this film, more or less. I feel like she deserved a little bit more of a ceremonious end. Like, what ends up happening is like, she's in bed and Nancy does successfully get Freddie into this realm. And then he attacks Marge.
Yeah.
Attacks her in bed and then...
Which just, I mean, kind of makes sense. She's the one who kept his knife fingers as her own trophy.
And then... But, like, we don't get to see that happen. We just see the aftermath.
See Marge and Freddie have that moment of, like, reuniting, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, he does burn her alive.
That's true.
Which is what
he does
she
burn
did
her
to
alive.
him.
And does kind of a similar thing with Glenn, where, like...
Oh, yeah,
like,
it sort of
she
sinks
absorbs into the bed. Yeah.
There's, like, a hole in the middle of the bed.
And into what I can only imagine is the underworld.
Which is also kind of what happens to Nancy in the bathtub. She gets absorbed.
True.
Into
Yeah, she
the
gets
bathroom.
pulled down. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a theory that Marge is our scholar because we only have 4 teens.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, who's our scholar? And so, to me, I make the argument that it is Marge because she does give us, again, the lore drop.
She's the lore drop.
Right. She's the one who tells us.
That's fair. I guess I was just sort of thinking that there wasn't a scholar, or that if there was, it was sort of like folded into the final girl.
Right, because, Nancy, that's what I wrote in my notes, is that Nancy could be, because of that research that she conducted, right?
And of course, this is one of the first 3 slashers, so... And no slasher, like, perfectly does those archetypes, you know?
Right, yeah. But I just kind of thought that because, again, of the people who get got by Freddie.
Yeah,
it's
she is
Nancy,
one of the ones.
It's Rod, it's Glenn, and it's Marge.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that part.
Yeah, anyway.
So yeah, you're right. She's the one with all the information that, for some reason, she is withholding from her daughter. That's the other thing that I was sort of left thinking about, was sort of like, what does this movie think makes a good parent?
Yeah.
Because we seem to see these 2 types of parents, and I think Marge is interesting because she goes between both of these, which is the neglectful parent and the over-controlling parent. You know? And we don't really have, like, any parent who's representing, like, a good medium or something, or, like, just a good parent.
No, and I think that's because it's the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? I think
that's more of that evangelical suburbia stuff.
Yep. And, like...
nuclear family.
And the uncomfortability with broaching subjects that, like, actually matter to your teen, you know? Yeah. Especially around, like, sexuality or anything like that.
But but I just found it interesting, this, like, kind of, I don't know, dichotomy or something, where it's like we have the example of, like, Tina's mom, who obviously is neglectful. She has this lover that, like, she is spending time with when she should technically be with her daughter, I guess, is the reasoning.
Yeah.
And, like, further exemplified by the fact that Tina and Rod are able to have sex in
her bed.
Yeah, in her fucking bed.
Yep.
You know? And there's, like, the thing of, like, well, you weren't there, and so Tina died. In contrast to, like, Nancy's mom, Marge, was there when Nancy had that nightmare in the bathtub and, like, kept her from dying that time, maybe, kind of, you know, was there. But then we also have, like, Glenn's parents, who are, like, who are not neglectful.
No.
Like, he has 2 married parents. There's no divorce going on, like, with Tina and Nancy. His mother keeps checking in on him before bed and is just sort of like, remind her to get some sleep, you know?
Yeah, and she's very kind.
Yeah.
She's not, like, yelling at him or anything.
No,
it's like, it's almost midnight.
I mean, his dad has this one thing about, like, you've just got to be firm with these kids. That's all. But it seems just more like he's kind of, like, in a dad way, just sort of lightly annoyed by Nancy,
who keeps calling at this late hour.
Yeah,
yes.
And it just seems very, like, it doesn't seem that bad, but I guess could be seen as maybe controlling.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
Like, he's not giving Glenn the choice of whether or not he wants to talk to Nancy.
Right. Yeah.
It's just sort of like he's decided that Glenn will not be talking. That Glenn, it is bedtime. You're not, you know.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, Glenn isn't any safer than Tina. So, like, what kind of parenting style does make your child safe? It just seems like there isn't a solution in this film.
No.
Because, like, Nancy is the closest person we get to being safe, though it's unclear in the ending if she gets got or not. Though in Dream Warriors, it turns out she doesn't.
No, she does not get got.
But, like, at the end of this film, you really couldn't say.
Yeah.
Right? Because she's stuck in the...
Yeah.
But then she has parents who, like her mom, can, on the one hand, be sort of neglectful with her alcoholism and needing parented by Nancy, but also can be controlling and like putting the bars, making her go to the sleep clinic, you know, and not listening to Nancy. And then like her dad does the sheriff have a name?
Yes, I have
Sheriff
it
Thompson.
here. No, it's John Saxon as Lieutenant Donald Don Thompson.
Don Thompson.
Donnie.
Yep. He just fucking uses his daughter in like a sting operation first.
Totally, without telling her that that's what's happening.
And I guess this is another mark against Nancy. She calls him out on it.
Yeah.
She's like, Daddy, you fucking used me. She doesn't say fucking.
Yeah.
She says, you used me.
That's, yeah.
And like, he is surveying his daughter. He's literally like watching her.
And yet still not coming to her aid.
And yet not there when he needs to be. Yeah. And it's just sort of like, well, then what is a parent? What is a good parent? It doesn't exist. It's not
I don't
any of
think it
these.
exists, yeah. Which honestly does, funny enough, sort of play into like my own personal understanding of parenthood, especially motherhood, as like basically a big scam.
Oh, but there's no way you can come out.
There's no way
as, like,
that you can
not
do
be
it.
Villainized.
Yeah, basically.
It's always the mother's fault. Blame the mother.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, also
mommy issues, daddy issues.
Yeah. Just related to this topic, that just I found absolutely fascinating is that when the opening credits roll, the first two names listed are the actors who play Nancy's mom and dad.
Oh.
Then they list the kids.
Yeah.
Heather Langenkamp, the one, our final girl who plays Nancy, she's third billed.
Yeah.
Funny that we're billing the parents first, and yet they do nothing.
They are fucking useless.
They are useless.
But they do have really like the acting that they do. I mean, it's Marge who gets the monologue about Freddy's back, the lore drop, as you said. Yeah. And our Lieutenant Don Thompson, does quite a lot of wonderful face acting. When he finally understands that Nancy is not fucking crazy and sees Marge all just burnt up and then melting through the bed.
Yeah.
The look on his face.
With just that classic 1980s special effects with like the obviously fake skeleton arm that's only got one hinge on it and it just moves so unnaturally. Yeah. And like no shade, because like again, like these effects, like this is the evolution of these effects, like why we have the effects that look so good. Like we had to do it like that before, and like there are like trailblazers and like innovators.
And some of the effects that they did in this film were, I mean, the geyser of blood where they had
pretty gosh darn good,
where they used rotating rooms for that and for Tina's death.
Yeah. So no shade, but I was just like, oh my god, that is from the 80s. Wow. But the face acting. Yeah.
No, I think he's very talented, and I do think he's an interesting character. I said this off mic. It's interesting to me that we get the story that, you know, Fred Krueger was able to kill 20 children at least before the cops did anything, and then fucked up the case so that Fred got off on a technicality.
Right.
And then Nancy's dad is now a lieutenant in the police force, and it just sort of made me wonder, like, if before justice was not enough, and like the parents had to take justice in their own hands, and I think it's implied that he was a part of that, or at least knew about it.
Well, yeah,
because he knows what Marge is talking about.
Marge says the parents.
Yeah,
right.
Like it's implied. Like I feel like at Rod's funeral, they sort of have a moment where they talk about it, where it's like it's never explicit that he was there, but like at the very least, he knows about it. Mm-hmm. And like still, he becomes a cop, and I'm like, did you think that maybe this was how you would do better? Maybe that like he could do better.
Did you feel a call to law enforcement after?
Yeah, or like he thought maybe this would be how he would right past mistakes, but then he ends up making what I imagine were probably the same mistakes that happened before, which is that people are not listening to the assaulted children about what is going on, and he just sits there thinking he knows what's best because he is the patriarch.
Yep.
I don't know.
Are we ready to talk a little bit more about Freddy?
Yeah.
Let's get into that allegation of killing at least 20 children.
What the fuck?
So, first of all, no. So, this is, I think, the one that, so it's very well known that in the movie, Freddy is called a child murderer. But we know that in the script and through every ounce of symbolism in this film that he is a child molester. Right. So, and you'd think that they'd make some edits once they decided, okay, he's a killer, not a molester. 20 kids?
what the
in one community
before the cops did anything, and like there are still people living in this town.
That would like decimate the community.
Like that'd be a whole generation.
Yeah, that's like
fucking gone.
That's like an entire classroom of kids, right? Yeah. Just not there.
Just fucking not there.
And they're not freaking out or moving or it takes forever for law enforcement to get involved.
And still have faith somehow in law enforcement and in like their school system and in all these other things. I did love that was the part I found most interesting in the article that I think we both read, or the chapter, I guess, that we both read in
It Came From the Closet.
It Came From the Closet, the one called The Trail of His Flames by Tucker Lieberman.
Okay.
Was just, I don't know, he brought up numerous times about how like how weird it is how normal people are treating this. Like despite the overnight murder of Tina, school has not been canceled.
No, school's not been canceled. Nancy has been allowed to go to school. She does mention, and I completely understand that she's like, I'm going to go crazy if I hang
I understand
out here.
her reasoning, but still as a parent, I'd be like, fuck no.
Fuck no.
And as like a teacher at the school, I'd be like, well, have you met our school counselor?
Yeah, right.
Why don't you spend some time there?
Might not have been a thing.
Maybe don't be in our class talking about Hamlet, murder, graves, stuff.
Yeah. It's also just super quick. The teacher who teaches Hamlet.
Yeah.
The actress's name. Her name is Lynn Shay.
Oh.
And she's a badass. She has like a long history of doing horror films.
She's the one who's the wife of the producer guy.
I think yes.
Robert Shea.
Who owned New Line Cinema at the time. Yeah. And so she has like a long history of being in horror movies, and she's actually the sort of clairvoyant character in the first Insidious. Oh. She's in the Insidious franchise. So just props to Lynn Shay.
Yeah.
Like everybody put some respect on that name. She's legit.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Scream Queen. Just the part in that article by Tucker Lieberman where he's like, talking about the at least 20 kids who were murdered, where he's like, at least now we understand better why her school administrators are unfazed by losing Tina and Rod on consecutive days. Yeah, this amount of child death is normal for this town.
Exactly. Yeah,
I just thought that was like a really good point. That like
the kids are dropping like flies.
Yeah,
in a town, in a culture that is supposed to care very deeply about the safety of children.
That chapter does a good job. Tucker Lieberman does a good job at just sort of pointing out like how dysfunctional this all is. Like, it's not just her nightmares where something is going wrong. Like, it's her life where, like, her school administration is just going on like nothing happened. Her parents are, like, just going on.
Teachers are just teaching lessons.
Like, this whole town has something weird going on with it where they just had 20 kids get murdered and now more kids are getting murdered. And they're just like, oh, well.
Business as usual. Status quo. Yeah.
And it definitely,
absolutely.
It is one of those things where it makes more sense if he is a molester rather than a murderer. Because it's like... Yeah, like you said, that's an easier thing to believe, that 20 kids were molested.
1,000%.
And that people are just sort of like burying that under the rug and not talking about it.
Yes.
And that Nancy isn't being believed about what's going on right now, actually because she was a previous victim.
Yeah.
So that's like why she isn't getting believed.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, this is just her past trauma coming back up.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, there are two just crystal clear signs that Freddy is like a sexual predator.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us what they are? Because I'm sure you know what they are.
Well, I mean, I know the most explicitly sexual actions that he does. I think in general, sexuality in this movie is like a very violent thing. Not just with Freddy Krueger.
Sex and violence are deeply entrenched.
Obviously, it's with Freddy, but it's also like we said with Rod and Tina's relationship, there's something sort of like violent almost in their interactions with each other, where he's like grabbing her and
he picks her up.
And it's like a play fight sort of thing.
And we know that they fight a lot.
Yeah. And then it's like, and like in a way, the violence of the neglect of her mother who's off having sex, you know, and then like, Glenn's morality sex thing, associating sex with immorality.
Or at least premarital sex. Right? And like abuse as a form of violence, and how neglect is a form of abuse. Right.
Yes.
That's literally what they're experiencing
with these parents. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine what's going on with Rod.
Yeah.
With his parents who don't even exist. Yeah. But the big explicit sexual imagery. Well, I'm wondering, I have my two. Are you counting, I'm specifically thinking of the two that happened to Nancy. Are you thinking of the one with Tina? that a lot of people pointed out is kind of rapey, her death scene. And just her running away from him in the alley is also sort of rape imagery.
No, actually.
Okay, yeah, because I wasn't going to count that one.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right.
But the other two, the Nancy ones.
The Nancy ones.
Which is actually one of my favorite, is... I hate water.
I know.
And I often, while I am showering or bathing, have, obsessive thoughts in my head of things rising up to grab me.
Oh, always, yeah.
So
through the drain.
Yeah, the knife fingers coming up between
her spread legs.
Her spread legs when we know she is naked.
Yep, in the tub.
It is very much that sexual predator energy. Yep. And also a little bit of like...
That's one. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I wrote as my exhibit A.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it's more example of his like him always going for like the womb, abdomen, pelvis region thing that he does.
Yep, especially when he kills women.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Not so much. Yeah. We don't know what he does to Glenn.
No, he just liquefies Glenn.
Yeah. And Rod, he just strangles. So yeah, it's only really the girls. But yeah, and then the one that stands out to me, of course, is the phone turning into Freddy's mouth and tongue. And like trying to tongue Nancy by saying, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. And then like he licks her.
Yes. Literally licks her through the phone. And it's worth noting, you can tell it's a dream because the phone is not plugged in.
Okay.
But it's ringing.
But it's also, she's awake though, because then this is when she's awake. I was so confused by this one. Where I was like, is she awake or not? Because then after that is when she starts making all her booby traps.
Right, she starts to get everything set up, yeah.
So, like, at what point are we a dream and what point are we awake? And is it all a dream?
Yeah.
That is
yes, when Nancy picks up the phone that she has unplugged from the wall and taken the cord that plugs into the wall and wrapped it around the phone. And then it's on her bed and it rings. And she picks it up and it's Freddy. Right.
Yeah. I guess she's maybe kind of like, I feel like was sort of what was happening to Glenn when he was listening to the music and they were like, KRGR radio. Yeah. That he was in sort of that like, that first stage of sleep where you're like not quiet asleep, but your thoughts are a little dreamy.
Yep.
I feel like maybe Nancy's sort of stuck a little bit perpetually in that because she has been so wide awake
She's
for so
not
long
sleeping.
That she really is just sort of like one foot in the waking world and one foot in the dream world. And that's sort of like.
Did you just say fit?
One foot. One foot in front of the other.
It's like et.
It's like et. No.
Do you want to say that again? Or I love it. You can keep it. Or do you want to say it again?
Just let me say things wrong.
I love it.
Let me be me.
Yep. You got to be you. There's nobody else you can be. Yeah. Yep. That's my exhibit A and my exhibit B. Absolutely. And that's enough. But there's so much more. Right? Even the fact that he says, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy, is like a grown man talking to a teenage girl.
The fact that he's always going after these teen girls in their bedrooms.
Yes, like that he ends up in the beds of these
rolling
people,
around
including Marge.
Yeah.
He's
clearly a sexual predator.
That's sexual predator behavior.
Clearly gets some sort of delight out of toying with them in a way that feels sexually charged.
And then just thinking about, again,
in that way that rape isn't as much about sex as it is about power.
Right, yeah.
And
then just thinking about, this is true for a lot of psycho killers, like their weapon represents a phallic object, right? And the finger knives do that too.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like the fingers themselves also have like a connotation of like a different kind of sexual penetration.
Yeah.
Right? So that's just interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. One that is explicitly not like straightforward heterosexual PIV sex.
Yes.
The wholesome kind that makes babies.
Yes.
He is doing something perverse just by using his fingers.
Yes.
And using those fingers to specifically stab at abdomens, stab at wombs.
Yep.
He is doing something sort of like anti-family and anti-baby making.
Yep.
And therefore is sexually perverted.
How dare
in like
he.
a literal like perversion of norms sort of way.
Absolutely. And then he gets punished for that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Which I'll talk about. Anything else about Freddy? Oh, yeah. The other themes. Yes.
Well, this one actually kind of fits, which
Let's
is
do it.
The other thing I find interesting about Freddy, beyond like the way that he loves to like play with them and like he like gets off on scaring them and like hurting them before he kills them. Like he kills them in very violent ways that hurts.
Yeah.
He also has these like weird moments of like masochism. Like, why does he cut off his own fingers? Why does he slash against his own chest and make himself bleed?
Yeah.
And, like, he's really into it when his face does get ripped off.
Yeah.
He's, like, I think part of it is just that he loves making them scared, and that's, like, another way to scare them. But, like
like showing
that he can't be hurt in any way that matters.
Look what I can do even to myself, and like I
how
will still
sick and twisted I am. But
And
it's like a weird masochism that I'm like, I don't know what to do with, I guess.
Yeah, like nobody can take me down, not even myself.
Yeah.
Almost. Because that is, again, one of the like the kind of like a cornerstone of the psycho killer in a slasher, like, is that they seem unstoppable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's part of his unstoppableness.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is just sort of like the fact that he is a nightmare king, that he has power over dreams.
Yeah.
That he's like I said before about Rod not reacting it quick. I'm not sure that he could have done anything to save Tina.
Yeah.
But like he didn't even try because for the longest time he thought it was another nightmare because he was having a nightmare like right before that.
Yep.
And like these kids are entering the state where they can't tell dream from reality.
Yep.
And that's because of the power that Freddy has, where he can make dreams into reality, and he can like take things from reality and put them in the dreams, and vice versa.
Yep.
And I do think that's part of also what makes Nancy the final girl, is that she's like strangely immediately adept. Maybe not immediately, but pretty quickly adept at also navigating this dreamscape, where like she realizes, oh, if I burn myself, I can wake myself up.
I will wake myself up. Yeah.
And like she carries that mark through with her. So it's not just like things associated with Freddy that can cross the line. It's also something that she does to herself that can cross from.
Yep. And she is successful in getting Freddy into the real world.
Yeah. And she has certain power when she's like, it's just a dream. Like that can kind of like wake her up sometimes. And like there's this power in recognizing it's a dream. And like, I think in Dream Warriors, that whole like having power over dreams thing is explored even more, and she's like really good at it. But yeah, just the fact that she takes even just Freddy's hat, let alone all of Freddy, out of the dream is like, that is an insane amount of power, and she didn't even have to die to do that.
Yeah.
So like, what kind of power
she didn't even really try.
Yeah, like what kind of power would she have if she was in like Freddy's position?
If she was Balinese.
If she was Balinese and had dream skills. But yeah, but then still, how much of that is actually Freddy letting her get away with it? Because as we know, she has her final act at the end of the movie. She turns her back on him. She uses her Balinese dream skills and what her mama tells her to do. And she's like, I'm taking all of the energy I've given you. I'm taking it back. Yep. This is all a dream. Yep. I'm going to wake up. My friends are going to be okay. My mom's going to be okay. Bye-bye. Yeah. And Freddy like dematerializes. But of course, she goes outside. She has her mom with her. She sees her friends.
Yeah. It's also, so that final scene, right?
Yes.
So
should we just talk about it?
Should we just talk about it?
Yeah,
Can I just tell you what I think happened?
Yeah.
So this is my reading of the final scene, right? So first of all, it is a dream, right? It's totally a dream. So I don't know if what happened before that is a dream, but like basically the way I understand it is that Tina, Rod, Glenn, Marge, they did. They got. It's too late.
Yeah.
Right? And so when Nancy turns her back, right, she takes away his power and she saves herself.
Oh.
But
that doesn't mean she saved them.
She doesn't save them. They still got. And then we see that in that final scene where, and you can tell it's a dream because it's, it's like, just everything about
it's gauzy.
And you can tell
that
it's
those jump rope girls again.
The jump rope girls are back.
Her mom's being too nice.
Her mom is being too nice and talking about how she's like, you know what, I just don't feel like drinking anymore.
Yeah,
which
that's how
is
that works.
The fantasy of a child of an alcoholic, right? Yeah. She's like, I just don't feel like it.
I'm done now. I'm a perfect mother now.
I had enough.
Maybe your dad and I will even get back together.
Yeah,
who knows?
Right. And then like basically Freddy embodies the car that they all get trapped in.
You can tell by the red and green stripes.
The hood, yes. And then like the car drives away and then, Marge gets got again, right? And so like to me, it's just Freddy like reiterating like, okay, I'm leaving you alone now. But like
I done did what I did.
They're gone. Yeah. And like they're dead. You can't have them back. I'll leave you alone until the third film.
Yeah.
When I will actually
That's the only reason why when I watched the ending, I was like confused because I had seen the third film.
And she comes back.
I was like, because the ending to me reads like he got her.
Yeah.
Because she's also in the car with her friends. Yeah. So I just was
that
sort of like,
died.
I was sort of like, wait, but then how does she survive? But I kind of like you're reading that like, that was Freddy sort of being like, okay, sure. But
you took your power back. Okay.
I can't get you, but also you're going to be traumatized by me forever. And also all your friends and your mom's dead. So like, who really won, bitch?
Yeah, basically.
So I do like that reading. I also do like, I don't remember. Was it in the Tucker Lieberman piece that was talking about how like, the ending could just be pointing to the fact that all of it was a dream. Like every part of the movie was a dream. Like there's a reason why it's called A Nightmare on Elm Street is because the whole thing is just one big nightmare, you know? And that the ending kind of does point to that in a way that like, to start getting briefly into my upcoming literary corner, you know, there's the Hamlet line that gets quote, which is that all is not as it seems, that could be suggesting.
Something is rotten in the state of Denmark.
Yeah, something is suggesting that something is rotten in Elm Street.
On Elm Street, yeah.
And that could explain also why all of the parents act so fucking weird. And that there's other weird kind of dream logic-y stuff and why at certain points it gets hard to tell what is, like, was Nancy asleep during the weird phone tongue part? Yes, but she just woke up and she stays awake and then she goes back to sleep.
Yeah, right.
So, like, when did she wake up and when did she go to sleep?
And then the way, like, when Tina dies, right, she thinks she wakes up from her nightmare and she goes out and then she, like, leaves the house and then that's when, like, the alleyway scene happens before she dies, right? So
they're, like, the fake outs.
Yeah, it is a weird kind of combination between.
Where it's, like, it's never really fully clear what is dream and what is reality.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's because none of it is reality. Or at least none of it from the point of maybe the jump rope girls.
That because they're very ethereal.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of gauzy and then foggy.
Yeah.
You know?
So like, why are they there when the kids are walking to school, when they're all awake, talking about their dream?
Yeah. And then Tina very quickly after that makes a reference to the jump rope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, but I can talk about Hamlet now.
Oh no! All right. I don't know if anybody knows this, but Hamlet is Katie's jam.
He's my homeboy.
Yeah, you love
He's my
Hamlet.
special little guy.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean the character. I just mean the entire play.
Yeah, no, I do quite like Hamlet. It's one of my faves.
Yeah. All right.
It's a top 3.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want you to have to narrow it down to anything less than that.
Yeah.
For good old Shakespeare.
Yeah, and I can't give up Love's Labour's Lost and Troilus and Cressida.
Duh.
All
right, anyway. Literary corner.
Yeah. So what I specifically want to talk about is Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet.
Oh my gosh, the very beginning?
Because that is the scene in the English class that the boy, her fellow classmate, starts to recite a random part from the middle of that scene.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is interesting to me, again, like the whole idea of teaching Hamlet, right? Yeah. And that it's Act 1, Scene 1, right? Mm-hmm. And after the fact that a student just died violently, it's like, hey, dude, start teaching Hamlet next time.
Let's take
a day.
Quick little detour to, I was going to say Midsummer's Night Dream.
Not that one. Yeah.
Not that one.
I don't know. Read a couple sonnets or something.
Yeah, some sonnets.
Yeah, but like if you're literally starting a brand new lesson or like unit of content, like why don't you what's the harm to push it back one day?
Yeah.
Tina just died, guys.
Somebody who was in your class.
Anyway, so
my best friend's right there.
Act 1, Scene 1.
Yeah, it's Act 1, Scene 1. Hamlet is not in it. The only characters are some night watchmen and Horatio and the ghost of Hamlet's dad.
Got to. Because at this point, Hamlet's dad's already dead.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think I build this in our notes as a close reading of Act 1, Scene 1. I'm not actually going to do a close reading of the whole thing, but I did break it down into like 3 topics that I want to start with. And my first one is just sort of more on the Nightmare King of it all.
Absolutely.
Because something that stands out to me about this scene is that it is... Okay, well... For people who have not read Hamlet.
I mean, I read it in high school and I haven't read it since. So you're going to need to refresh my memory too.
Well, the first scene, not to, I'll try not to give spoilers for the rest of the play. We'll just talk about the first scene. But it's nighttime and they are meeting, in the dark. I think on the walls of the castle, maybe, or at least that's where it's often staged. Mm-hmm. Because they are, the guards on duty at night, and Horatio is there. They bring Horatio along because they keep seeing the image or an illusion or a ghost of the recently deceased king of Denmark, Hamlet.
Senior.
Not to be confused with Prince Hamlet,
So Hamlet's the last name?
No, he was just named after his dad.
Of course, as one is.
Yeah. He's just Hamlet the second. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, he's Prince Hamlet. That's King Hamlet.
King Hamlet.
Don't worry about it. Yeah. So, and it's just them trying and honestly failing to interact with this ghost. And in the end, concluding that the only person who is going to be able to talk to this ghost is the ghost's son, Prince Hamlet. Which, I mean, was my first sort of little clue of like, oh yeah, this does have relevance to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Because what it comes down to is like, this is the matter for like parents and children.
Yes.
Like other people trying to get involved, it won't work. It really has to be like,
matter.
This has to be a conversation between Marge and Nancy.
Yeah.
This has to be a conversation between Hamlet Sr. and Hamlet Jr.
Yeah.
You know? But like I said, it takes place at night, which also is very thematic with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like this specter, this ghost, whoever he is, he's only appeared during the night watch, sometimes between like midnight and 1 a.m. And like
pretty good witching hour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when the cock crows and morning approaches, that's when the ghost, quote, starts like a guilty thing and vanishes. You know, which is very
like startled.
Startles.
Okay.
Yeah.
A guilty thing.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's like, Freddy Krueger
He's the
also
one who got murdered. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's the thing. Nighttime in this era is off. Well, and honestly, kind of today.
Yeah.
It's seen as like a more like evil time.
Yep.
Versus the day.
Yep.
Like in comparison.
Yep.
That like night is something either corrupted or capable of corrupting.
Yep.
And also at night, things don't always appear as they really are.
Right.
All is not as it seems.
I'm sure that you've had this thought, and maybe you're even going to say it, but like I also think about the way that we think about the sun and the moon, and how the sun is often masculinized and the moon is feminized, and how like the terror of what can happen at night
is also this terror
might have to do with femininity
and like the association with the occult and like witchcraft.
The witch's
that
Sabbath.
being more I mean, it has been associated with men too, but it is this sort of feminine thing versus the priests of the daytime. Absolutely. And in the same way, Freddy Krueger is a creature of the night. Like, he doesn't really appear during the daytime. I think there's Nancy. Yeah, she literally during the scene, it's the daytime and she falls asleep.
When she's in class?
Yeah. But he doesn't, we don't see him.
That's true.
We see
not till you get down into the boiler room.
You see a hall monitor using his voice.
Yes. Yep.
Right? And like kind of like, like little pieces,
fingers,
but like, but we don't see his face, I guess is what I mean.
Right, yeah.
Like he doesn't like fully manifest during the daytime.
Yeah, he's like stays a little bit more hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they use this phrase in Hamlet. They ask the ghost, "What art thou that usurpest this time of night?"
Wait, what's that word? Usurpest?
To like usurp.
Oh.
But usurpest.
To take something that doesn't belong to you?
Yeah. Okay. That he's usurping this time of night.
Oh.
And I just think that stood out to me because another thing they're talking about, because they're talking to this ghost who is King Hamlet, and they talk about how he is like a conqueror. He was a military hero, you know? He took over Norway.
He's a big deal.
And that was like that was a total big deal. And that's like part of why they're also, all the guards are feeling a little on edge, isn't just because of the ghost. It's also because King Hamlet just died. Ghost. And he is appearing in all of his armor, all of his regalia.
Uh-oh.
And young Fortinbras, from the son of the guy whose land King Hamlet conquered and took.
Yeah.
That kid is like, oh, well, now the guy who killed my dad is dead. I'm going to go take back all the land he took.
Right.
So like he's gearing up for war.
Yeah.
So all the guards are like, fight could be coming at any moment.
Yep.
But it also just sort of made me think of like Freddy Krueger as like the conqueror of the dream realm, or like having taken this place. I keep calling him the Nightmare King. Yeah. That he has this sort of like rulership, this dominion, one of our favorite words, dominion, over this realm. And like the part that really stands out to me is like when he, I think Tina, maybe Nancy, is like, oh God. And he's like, he like holds up his little knife fingers and is like, this is God.
Oh yeah.
That like he sees himself as like,
Godlike. Yeah.
He sees himself as
he
godlike.
does have a significant amount of power and influence when they're in
that's
dream
what,
realm.
what you said about the slasher killer being somebody who is like unstoppable in a way that is paranormal.
Or at least seems that way. Right.
And that's also the case with Ghost Dad in Hamlet, where
Hamlet Senior.
Yeah, where they're like, we need the ghost to stay and talk to us. Let's get out our weapons. That will work. And then one of the guys, after it doesn't work, is like, we do it wrong, being so majestical to offer it the show of violence, for it is as the air invulnerable, and our vain blows malicious mockery.
Ooh.
He's like, why did we fucking try that?
It's a
fucking ghost. We can't fucking stop it.
A sword isn't gonna do fuck all.
Yeah, in the same way that a sword wouldn't do fuck all against Freddy. Like, I mean, the fucking booby traps that Nancy sets up would kill a man. Yeah. He gets set on fire. He's like, that's fine.
I think he gets a crotch shot too, doesn't he? That was really funny,
I know,
actually.
It's really funny. I know, it's just hard for me.
Yeah, he's literally set on fire and he continues to run around the house like he's not on fire. Yep.
Yeah, there's like no way to actually harm him.
Yeah.
And the last thing I was sort of thinking about with that was that a lot of the anxieties of Hamlet echo real anxieties of the time that Shakespeare was
when
writing.
It was written?
About Queen Elizabeth I's, like, she was getting older. Her health wasn't as good as it was. She was going to die soon.
Yeah, and she had been sovereign for quite a while.
And she didn't have, like, an appropriate heir. She didn't have a child.
She didn't have any kids. Is she the virgin queen?
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, she never married. She didn't have kids. The best option for an heir was James I, who was Catholic when she was
going to say a Catholic?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so and Hamlet is really about this anxiety that happens when the old king dies and like who takes power next.
Yeah.
In this case, King Hamlet's brother steps in instead of his son. So it was sort of like the right power transition didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so like those transitions of power being places where betrayals and tragedies can take place is a thing. And I just kind of think that there's also a transition happening in Elm Street that's like different but no less terrifying to people, which is the transition between adolescent and
adulthood. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Like, because Nancy and all of her friends are reaching that age where they're beginning to date.
Yes.
They're having sex. They're making decisions of their own that go against their parents' wishes.
They are working on becoming adults.
They're questioning what their parents are deciding to do.
Yep.
Also, there's an upset in power that's happening there.
I'm also just thinking about, just because I teach adolescence.
Yeah.
Like the fact that adolescence is like this liminal space between childhood and adulthood, and kind of the way that like dreams are sort of a liminal space.
It's that transition. And especially when, like I was saying, Nancy gets in those places that are sort of like half dream, half reality.
Half reality, yep.
That's interesting.
Where like she is awake, however, a phone that is not plugged in is ringing.
Yeah.
Right?
And then has a mouth. Yeah.
And a tongue.
Yeah. And I think there's like a kind of similar, the way that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. There's like something rotten in Elm Street in that like the adults are no longer really this unquestionable authority in their kids' lives. The kids are starting to have lives of their own.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like I said, this was really clearly shown in the way that we start with Nancy in bed and her mother comforting her.
Yep.
And end with Nancy's mother, Marge, in bed and Nancy comforting her. Like we have an actual reversal. And then we also have Nancy kind of taking power from her father too, where like before he was setting her up and doing that sting thing, but this time she's like, Dad, I'm gonna do this plan, you need to be there at this time, fucking do it.
Yeah.
And like he doesn't do it, but when he does show up, she's like, see, this is what I fucking said.
Yeah.
Like she was right. So it's like this interesting, I think it's like a similar anxiety about like who is in power now, what happens during that period of time where the power is shifting before it's established again.
Especially in a place and during a time where there's just like a lot of animosity between Protestants and Catholics.
Yeah, well, yes.
Which lasts for quite a while.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about in this one, my second of three things, is like madness and disbelief and sleep or lack thereof. Very early on when Horatio shows up to see this ghost, it said, one of the guards is like, Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. In other words, Horatio thinks it's all in our heads. And we haven't actually seen this. Our imagination is getting the better of us. Yeah. He doesn't believe us.
Because you're night guards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just was like, okay, well, that's literally what Nancy's dealing with too.
Yeah.
They don't fucking... Like, even the boys who are literally having the same nightmares don't fucking believe Nancy and Tina. Like, they're really... And that this turns into all of this talk of Nancy going mad. Nancy's just seeing things. Nancy's like maybe remembering things. She's gonna go crazy if she doesn't dream, but she's also gonna go crazy if she doesn't go to sleep. But she can't go to sleep and can't dream. So obviously she's just crazy. And she, like you said, even questions it when she first wakes up and doesn't have friends.
I am crazy, aren't I? Yeah. It's also that was actually an interesting thing. Her mom says you have to dream. Or
it's the sleep clinic
you have to dream. And I'm like, okay, sleep clinic guy, I think you know very well that people don't need to dream. They need to sleep.
I think. Yeah. I mean, I do think there has been science about, like, because even when we don't remember our dreams, our brains are, like, dreaming.
Oh, we dream. Yeah, we're always dreaming.
Yeah, and that there is every time stuff that is happening when we're dreaming that our brain needs.
Yeah. But I feel like
it's the sleep the lack of sleep.
It's the sleep for sure. And then I just think about like people with PTSD who have reoccurring nightmares that actually keep them from sleeping. And it's like actually the medication that could maybe keep them from having dreams like that, is actually like integral to their well-being. But I know that that's not really what this movie is. Cares about. Yeah.
I mean, it could be a really interesting meditation on trauma if it was that Freddy Krueger was a molester and not a murderer.
Right.
But they don't do that. So.
Yeah.
But anyway, obviously, a big part of Hamlet is that it's unclear if Hamlet is crazy or not. Did he actually see this ghost?
Right.
Is this ghost actually his dad and not a fucking demon? Is he doing the right things? Is he actually going crazy? Is he pretending to be crazy? So that's a big thing. But also interesting to me is that, there's the line that also happens. It's not from the scene, but once Nancy actually goes to sleep, it's no longer the kid reciting the scene. The kid then says says a line that happens in Act 2, Scene 2, if you must know. A line from Hamlet, which is, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams. And that's like the only line we get in all of Hamlet that he's having a hard time sleeping.
References dreams.
Or like having nightmares or something, But notably, he is not the only tragic figure in Shakespeare plays who has a hard time sleeping. Like sleep vexes a lot of the tragic heroes of Shakespeare's play. Richard III is visited in his sleep by the ghosts of people he's killed. And Julius Caesar, Brutus's wife, is talking to Brutus about how, like, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, what's going on? Meanwhile, Caesar's wife is having nightmares about her husband who's about to get assassinated. Like, she's having prescient nightmares about it. She also lists Caesar's wife when she's talking about how, like, I have a bad feeling about this. Husband, don't go to the Senate meeting. Something bad is going to happen. And he's like, no, Calpurnia, I'll be fine. She starts listing all of these, like, foreboding signs that are going on in Rome. There are, like, eclipses and, like, the dead are like
strange weather patterns or something.
And like something going on with the dead where they're like leaving their graves, which is also the part of Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet the kid is reciting, where Horatio compares what's happening with the ghost to what happened to Julius Caesar. And he's like, the fact that we're having these omens is probably a sign that something bad is going to happen in Denmark, just like something bad happened in Rome.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a connection there. But anyway, back to bad sleep. Macbeth and Othello also have like increasing levels of insomnia as their tragedies continue. They can't fucking sleep. And as with like Richard III and Hamlet, there's this idea of ghosts of people who have been murdered approaching people either at night or in dreams, wanting revenge. And like Julius Caesar and Macbeth also have ghosts of murdered dead people appear. And like, it's just, they're either wanting revenge or just sort of like to unsettle the person who murdered them. And like, that's literally what Freddy Krueger is. He's a ghost who was murdered and wants revenge. So,
not on the people who did it to him, but like their kids.
Yeah,
right?
Because he has to go after kids because that's what he likes.
Yeah.
It's, it's a little bit for him, but also a little bit revenge.
Yeah.
But this goes back to the whole something is rotten, all is not as it seems stuff, where, like I said, Horatio, the lines that are being read aloud in the class for some reason are Horatio talking about all of these bad omens in Denmark before the coming of war, being like the bad omens that were there before Julius Caesar died. And it's an interesting part, but it also like, he's like, this bodes some strange eruption to our state. And my thought was like, oh, kind of like how Tina talks about how there maybe is an earthquake coming. Because weird things happen before earthquakes.
Yeah, that's her initial thought. Maybe there's an earthquake. Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know. But then there's also this idea of like what is seen is not always what is real. Which is another line that the English teacher quotes from Hamlet. Mm-hmm. And like I said, if the ending is also a nightmare, but it seems real to Nancy for a moment, in combination with Hamlet's supposed madness and Nancy's maybe going crazy too, there's like a way that we can question the reality of the entire movie. It's a nightmare. Like all is not what it seems.
Maybe it's all a dream.
Like maybe all is not what it seems.
Yeah.
Like what we see is not always what is real. And the English teacher says, according to Shakespeare, there was something operating in nature, perhaps inside human nature itself, that was rotten. A canker, as he put it. Now, of course, Hamlet's response to this and to his mother's lies, was to continually probe and dig, just like the grave diggers always trying to get beneath the surface. And like Nancy is literally being told what it is that she is about to do, which is to probe and dig. And to like see that her mother is lying to her and like keep digging and keep going. But she is also being told in this moment that it's going to end in tragedy. Right. That like she isn't going to win. Yeah. Because she is the Hamlet.
And some people are going to die.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just thought, I don't know. When it happened in the scene, I was like, why the fuck are they quoting this part of Hamlet? What? You know? But I started to dig into more. And I was just like, you're onto something with this one here, Wes Craven. I like it. I like it a lot. And any excuse to talk about Hamlet.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk about it too much. So there I am. Literary Corner.
Yay! Yeah, I actually, as I was watching the movie, I was taking notes. I wrote down, hold on, where is it? I wrote down, I can't wait to find out what Katie thinks about the Shakespeare scene.
Because you knew I'd have thoughts.
I knew you'd have thoughts. And then, and then she brings up Hamlet, and I'm like, well, that's like Katie's fave.
Yeah. I thought maybe it was just because of, Hamlet's famous line about, I would count myself king were it not that I have bad dreams, you know?
Yeah.
But like, there honestly is a lot more happening that is a good parallel.
Fascinating. You want to talk about cultural human sacrifice?
Yeah, in like the 80s and like 80s, Satanic Panic and stuff.
In case you all forgot from 2 episodes ago, Ronald Reagan wins the 1980 election.
No.
Kidding.
Stop.
No, but it's actually like we were mentioning, we kind of accidentally created a theme of these last few episodes.
Yeah.
And how, like, again, and this is something that has come up multiple times in our show, many examples of the fact that really what horror movies do, I mean, horror movies have many functions, but one of the bigger ones and one of the more important ones to me, at least, is that like they reflect our cultural anxieties, right? What we're concerned about, what we're afraid of, you know, and a pretty perpetual cultural anxiety is kids these days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found an absolutely fascinating article here, which you already mentioned, The Cultural Human Sacrifices in Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street by Brittany Caroline Speller. And there is just some fantastic stuff in here. So it just sort of interesting. Again, we've kind of been talking about this, right? We know, and you can listen to the They Live episode, that the 1980s kind of represents sort of a shift towards the right and conservatism.
As a backlash.
As a backlash against...
to the like free love 70s.
Of the 60s and the 70s, yes. Yes. So we've got this like move to conservatism and to the right politically and socially, right? And so what we get is, especially with this movie, it's very interesting, the way that we see the anxieties of younger people, right? The people who are working, you know, are growing up, right? Or the way that this movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street, portrays, like, even if it's sort of dreamlike and possibly not real, like this ideal middle class life, right? For white children, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, the characters, it's interesting, like they have very nice homes. They have nice clothes. They've got cars. They've got TVs in their room, which was crazy to me. And so it's interesting that like this movie shows like the young adult audience sort of this luxurious life, right?
That suburban ideal.
Right? But then when you actually look into the actual situation economically in the 1980s, like the economic and political realities like make that dream of that luxurious life like unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
And sort of the youth push back against that conservatism, which, like you mentioned, that backlash against the free love movement in the 60s and 70s. Young people at this time are like, but what about our free love movement, right?
Yeah,
like, how come you're like so cracked down on, the sexuality of young people, right? Like, how come we have to live in the era where sexuality is demonized as opposed to more celebrated?
Hypocritical, maybe.
A little hypocritical. Yep. So it's interesting the way this movie indicates the anxieties of the young people who make up the majority of the audience for this kind of movie, right? Yeah. But then it also absolutely shows us like the anxieties of mainstream culture, right? Like we've been mentioning, this movement towards, especially once Reagan becomes president, with the rise of the religious right and the moral majority, right? That we're really focusing on socially traditional families, so mom, dad, kids, right? We're focusing on immoral behaviors, especially from young people. So like premarital sex or drug use, right? And also it's worth noting that there's like a little bit of fear of like nuclear fallout happening too, right? But then of course,
communism.
You got to, yeah. But of course it's 1984. And so like we know that the Cold War is actually kind of in its last stage. But of course, they don't know
But
that.
this is the time when we're finally, 60s through now is the time when we're having the connection between, like, capitalism and godliness in contrast to communism and atheism. This is when we start to have "In God We Trust" written on our money.
Right. So
because it was like an anti-communism, anti-atheism thing. We are capitalists and we are godly,
and we are
going to put those things together. Our money is our god.
Yeah, right. That's basically
I have to go back to
they live. They live. I'm telling you. Okay,
but what they meant more was like God is approving of our money system, of our capitalism,
and of capitalism, and approves our morally upright ways of living. Yeah. So anyway, I just was really drawn to this idea of cultural human sacrifice. I found that absolutely fascinating. And so I'm going to read you a couple of clips here, right? So just so that we're all on the same page. Cultural human sacrifice is defined as the symbolic disposal through an artistic medium of an individual or group in order to ensure the perpetuation of a societal norm, secular value, or religious belief in the real world. The artistic mode through which cultural human sacrifice most often occurs is in movies, and more specifically in horror movies. Makes sense to me, right? So because like we don't make human sacrifices anymore, right? Like actual ritual, like physical human sacrifice, we don't do. And it's interesting the way that, especially like with the rise of the religious right and the moral majority, that their focus is on protecting children.
Yes, that right? is what it is. To go back to that other article that I was talking about. Yep. American Monsters, Tabloid Media, and the Satanic Panic from 1970-2000 by Sarah Hughes. She has this part kind of near the end of it talking about like horror films and how they have this sort of, how they kind of complemented evangelical ideas in the way you're talking about with that, like, we are punishing the people who are not obeying these like suburban evangelical ideals. She talks about how like, although these horror films had elements of like parody and satire, a virginal white female was always the lone survival, suggesting that evangelical ideas of suburbia were most specifically designed to articulate and destroy the threats against her. In other words, protect the child, protect the innocent, and then also goes on to say...
Protect the white girl who lives in the suburbs.
Yeah. Yep. Goes on to say, Protestant conceptualizations of a sacred and vulnerable white womanhood were not new in the United States, but were often explicitly tied to race. However, in the era of the Satanic Panic, the Charles Manson type of the like Satan worshiper cult stuff rivaled the ethnic and racial enemies that, those were still going on too, but not in the same way. Rivaled those as the most dangerous adversaries adversary of white women and children.
Right.
But that we are scared of the molester now.
Yeah, right. Who could maybe find their way into this suburban community.
Yeah, that's what makes him scary, is that he can be a part of the suburbia.
And that there is still harm and danger in the suburbs.
Yeah. There's like no way to get fully safe.
Yeah.
And that we need to protect the suburbs, and we need to protect the children because there is an enemy out there.
Yes. Won't someone please think of the children?
And the thing that we've been dancing around but haven't, I guess, explicitly said was that this came out during, well, I mean, we did say that this came out during the Satanic Panic, but we haven't actually outlined like what that is for people who don't know.
Sure, yeah.
And I think the big deal, I mean, it is kind of what it sounds like. People were scared in the 80s that there were Satan worshiping cults that were specifically harming children.
Specifically going after children.
A big case that like exemplified it was the McMartin preschool case.
Yes.
Where this like private preschool
starts in 84, but it's worth noting.
The first articles about it in the Los Angeles News were in 1983.
Oh, okay.
Before, because
trial starts in 84.
Yeah, because this was already in the news.
Yes.
When they made the decision, like, ooh, we probably shouldn't say molester. It was like part of the decision to not make Freddy Krueger a molester, but instead a murderer, was the McMartin case, which was like the big blow up of the Satanic Panic, because it was like these preschool employees, the teachers, these guys and gals are ritualistically, sexually, satanically abusing our preschool children.
Yes.
And like it was way blown out of proportion.
Oh my gosh.
It's been thoroughly like those people have all been.
Go learn one thing about the McMartin case. Like,
okay, that didn't happen.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, because there's stories from these kids about people like flying.
Because they asked 4-year-olds.
Yeah, and like you go back to the actual, there's like all these things about how like these kids were being like led.
Yes,
absolutely. There's like leading questions of like, so when they abuse, it was like, and like, did they also murder animals? And like,
they're like, yeah. I think one of the ones that got me is that like one of the kids or several of the children that like testified said something about like they got flushed down the toilet.
Yeah.
And like went to Mexico or something.
It's just like fucking, it's like the sort of nonsense that children say sometimes. And they're enjoying the attention.
Yeah. And that like the adults who should understand that by our laws of time and space, there's no way these people could take these kids to Mexico and bring them back before their parents picked them up,
Yeah. It's just like, it's all fucking nonsense. But it was this whole big panic that was happening in the 80s.
Huge deal.
That started, kind of like we already said, with like that kind of Catholic exorcism imagery, but became this big evangelical televangelist thing that people kept, and then became in the secular news this big thing of like these ritualistic abuse and things always getting, and then like before that there was the Charles Manson murders,
and then
which had Satan worshiping connotations, connections.
It's also worth noting, especially with the McMartin thing and the Satanic Panic aspect of the children, right, is that it's worth noting that throughout the 1960s, that is when mandatory reporting laws start to spread throughout the United States. And so like then it really starts to become a thing that is actually impacting communities by like the 70s and the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And so what a lot of people who are not paying attention or engaging in reality perceive as this sudden spike of a child violence,
child abuse, child sexual
domestic
abuse,
as like a failing of American morality, whereas like it's actually literally always been like this. This is America.
We just now have the information.
Like we have a culture of abusing our children in all kinds of ways, right? And now we're just like bringing it to the forefront because now we have these social institutions like schools, like hospitals that actually have to like bring this into the forefront of our minds,
and
right?
that happening at the same time that we're starting to have these panics about Satan worshiping cults. And then the combination of, even though like, the Charles Manson murders didn't involve children. That then those things are starting to get kind of combined, and they're getting combined in this like white suburbia. And that horror movies actually, I don't know, what I found really interesting about that dissertation that I'm talking about is that it really points out how like horror movies contributed to that in a lot of ways. If for no other reason than like sort of unquestioningly sort of taking for granted the fact that so many of these movies are set in like white suburbia.
Right. So anyway, as we were saying, obviously, like at least in Western cultures, we don't physically sacrifice humans anymore, right? So what Speller brings up is that so now and Western cultures are forced to develop new ways to purge themselves of unwanted people, specifically people who challenge cultural and social norms, right? Because that's not against the law.
Right.
You can't execute somebody
we can't actually execute Glenn for being a little princess.
Yeah, and we can't execute Nancy for taking matters into her own hands. Yeah. Anyway, so the only way this purging could legally be done, right, is through cultural modes like films, right? And it's also just worth noting that, like, of course, like, we've got this move towards a more, like, patriarchal structure, and that people who do not follow traditional gender roles or sexually active women who are not married, who are not attached, don't have a quote-unquote family, are like huge threats.
Yeah,
right?
They aren't a part of the patriarchy.
And they must be punished, which we see in especially slasher films.
That also kind of, ties in with the idea of protecting the children being the most important thing, and the idea that Freddy Krueger as a child molester actually being too scary even for a horror movie. Yeah. That he had to be changed to a murderer.
To a murderer. Which is somehow better or less scary.
Yeah, because somehow child sexual abuse in, like, suburbia, especially in these, like, nice white wealthy areas, like, it's not supposed to happen here. Like, that is, like, the ultimate embodiment of evil that needs to be purged in some way.
And that these people who are out to harm our children, we can tell by looking at them.
Yeah, that we can identify them easily. And then
that my neighbors are not contributing to the trauma of their children. It's these outside factors.
It's not that Marge is an alcoholic. Yeah. It's that there's a child molester monster murderer. But also at the same time that Freddy Krueger is getting punished in this extrajudicial way and is also being billed as, like, the monster of the film. At the same time that Tina is getting murdered for having underage sex or, like, premarital sex. Yeah. And, like, Rod is getting murdered for some drug use, and Glenn is getting murdered for being a little dainty.
For wearing a crop top.
Yeah. It's like, are these things equivalent things?
Yeah, right.
And, like, in, like, these, like, evangelical, right, Christian culture sort of ways in this white ideal suburbia. Yeah, those things are kind of, like, equal because they're all evil. They're all immoral. They all need to be punished in whatever way we can punish them. Even if that means the law can't do it, we will do it ourselves.
Yes, it's all a challenge to social and cultural norms.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's all against the family.
Yep, which is all that matters. And, of course, what makes the family is children.
Yeah.
Right? So I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. Right? And
I mean, it's very in line with a lot of things that we've already discussed.
Right.
And
I have not been turned on to the term cultural human sacrifice, and I will be using it all the time now.
Yeah, because it is what we've been talking about, how
this is what slasher films are.
How youth need to be punished.
Yes. So when at the very beginning, or like when you asked me, does this movie give you Satanic Panic? And we were like, yes. But you were like, I can't really explain why.
Yeah. By that I meant because it doesn't have any explicit demon.
That's true.
It has no Satanism.
You could consider
it doesn't even have
Freddy
a lot of
to
religion.
Be a demon?
I mean, it has that one cross that we see a few times, but it doesn't do anything.
No.
Which is actually why I really liked reading all this stuff about, like, the rise of evangelicalism and how it sort of supplanted Catholicism, and how all of those, like, markings of Catholicism didn't matter so much as, like, we are using the Satanic Panic to solidify our evangelical ideals, like, of the patriarchal family norms in suburbia.
And that there are people who want to cause harm, right? And that there are even youths who are, like, worshiping Satan.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, nobody's worshiping Satan here.
No.
Guys.
Because that implies that you also believe in God and, like...
Yeah, right? That you have, like, you still are adhering to the belief structure of Christianity.
Yeah, and that, I think, is the interesting thing, kind of, about horror films, when they do this thing where they're like, ooh, look at these evil monsters, but, like, at the same time are really upholding these, like, very evangelical, very traditional family standards, while being, like, seen as these very, like, subversive, dark, sort of like maybe a part of, like, a Satan worshiper would totally watch horror films, but it's like, no, they're a part of, like, upholding this very Christian standard of, like, these gender norms, these sexuality norms, these race norms, racial norms, like, all of it.
Absolutely. And it's also really interesting the way that especially queer people often find themselves reflected in the monsters.
Yeah.
Right?
And having this sort of sexual ambiguity with Freddy Krueger.
Right.
Specifically, obviously he is like a child molester, and that's like...
Well, yeah, but like...
but like in general he has this
especially in this like, you know, particular time of like extreme conservatism, like, and... a conservatism around sexuality, right? Any sex that happens outside of marriage is immoral. Any sex that happens that's not trying to produce a kid is immoral. Including putting child sex abuse and homosexuality in the same camp.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yeah, I don't want to be like... And then like... But what really I didn't realize when I asked you that question and then I looked into it was just sort of like the timeline of it all.
That is 1984.
That literally the McMartin preschool case was happening in the news at the time that Wes Craven was finishing up the script, and it was like this movie was getting made. Like that's like, oh, so it is like Satanic Panic. It's
a direct influence. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's not, that it is of the era and it is soaked in it.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like, I mean, it is.
Yeah, to
giving a lot of Satanic Panic, but like in a way that didn't seem explicit. But now that I have sort of looked into it more, it is actually, at the very least, very implicit.
Right. And you know what actually it was, I was thinking about it. I was like, what is happening in this movie that is giving the Satanic Panic vibes? It is the crucifix, right? And then it's also the fact that like Freddy does a lot of his terrorizing in a boiler room.
Yeah.
Which is dark. And like there's fire and it's hot and it's kind of giving a hell vibe a little.
Yeah, him being this like burn victim, so the fire association and his claws that are kind of animalistic and kind of the way that Satan can be animalistic.
Right.
There is that kind of imagery there, but also just like, the automatic association that I think people would make would be between somebody targeting children and Satan worship.
Yep.
Like it doesn't need to explicitly be said that he's a molester, and it doesn't need to explicitly said that there is something satanic going on.
Yep.
The fact that he is targeting children means that he is a satanic molester.
Yep. Yep.
So this has been Deep Thought Shallow Plots.
Thanks as always to Sound Guy Matt.
Join us next time. We're going to kind of continue with the theme and watch The Final Girls.
Yeah, so I think this has just really put a nice bow on this theme we didn't mean to create.
Yeah. Before we move into our revealed here first, Hot Alien Summer.
That's
coming to you soon.
Summer of 2025.
Hot Alien Summer.
Summer of 2025. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Deep Thought Shallow Plots.
Episodes available wherever you get you're listening to it right now. You found it, but also on YouTube.
And until next time, morality sucks.